story. Yeah. Because it's very, very similar to the stories of the patriarchs, because it happens during similar times, during the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yeah. Where Job, this incredibly prosperous, rich, influential person, God tests him. And this test is so horrendously tragic. Yeah, it's mind-blowing. To the point where most people who read it, within the context of the gospel, would say, God, what are you doing? Man, you're like, this is like almost like sadistic here. God, it's like, why are you doing this to a man that you consider to be, have integrity? This person is righteous. This person is blameless. Why did you allow such incredible tragedy, pain, and suffering to be inflicted upon someone you consider to be blameless? Someone who has integrity. Let's go there. Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 22. Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 22. Follow along with me. There once was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God and stayed away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in that entire area. Job's sons would take turns preparing feasts in their homes, and they would also invite their 3 sisters to celebrate with them. When these celebrations ended, sometimes after several days, Job would purify his children. He would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt offering for each of them. For Job said to himself, perhaps my children have sinned and have cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular practice. Verse 6, one day the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. Satan replied to the Lord, yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. All right, you may test him, the Lord said to Satan. Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically. So Satan left the Lord's presence. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's home with this news. Your oxen were plowing, with the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabeans raided us. They stole all the animals and killed all the farmhands. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all the shepherds. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 bands of Chaldean raiders have stolen your camels and killed your servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed, and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. Then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. He said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken away. Praise the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. Amen. Wow. Mind-blowing, isn't it? It gets me every time. Oh my goodness, yeah. You know, you think that the story is just, wow. Like, what does this have anything to do with me? Yeah. Who in this day and age really suffers like this, you know? You know, we think that we're so far apart and far removed from sufferings like this. Why? Because human beings have a tendency to cope with suffering by distancing ourselves from it. Yeah. That's why whenever we read the news, you know, our eyes, when it scrolls down, you know, our iPhones, you know, what do we? I mean, it's almost shameful to admit, but even sometimes I would pass like Israel, Ukraine, you know, earthquakes, tragedies, people dying because of natural disasters, and I would automatically go to popular news. You know, it's like it's a coping mechanism. You don't want to get involved. Yeah. Let them deal with their tragedy. Yeah. But we all do it because we don't want to get involved with the sufferings of other people. Why? Because it leaves this distasteful, this uneasy sense of, God, where are you? God, where are you? If you're honest, that's what you'll be asking. That's what I ask all the time. God, where are you? And God tells me all the time, I'm here. I've never left. I am still in control. You know? I am sovereign over these things. Why do you allow these tragic, horrible things, unthinkable, unimaginable things to happen to good people? Just like what Billy Joel sang during the 1970s, only the good die young. I used to sing that song all the time. Why? Because almost cynically, you know? Only the good die young, only the good die young. I used to love Billy Joel, but he's such an interesting man. Such a broken but oh my goodness. Yeah. But the thing is, it happens all the time. Yeah. And the message hasn't changed. God is saying, I am present, and I am intimately, sovereignly involved. Yeah. And I will bring about my goodwill and purposes for all of humanity, my creation, in due time. Yeah. And that's the message. But we still complain, don't we? Yeah. It's hard for us to say this statement that characterizes Job's life. Yeah. Do you know who actually said this? It is well, from the great hymn. Yeah. It is well with my soul. Yeah. No matter what, it is well with my soul. This was actually penned by a great man by the name of Horatio Spafford. Okay, he lived during the time of great change that was happening in the United States, and this guy was a really, really famous man, very successful businessman, very powerful, very influential in the business world as well. He was actually more of a modern rendition of a Job-like character, okay? Because a lot of the same things that happened to Job actually happened to Horatio Spafford. He lived during the latter half of the 19th century, during the time of great revivals in Europe as well. And he was one of those disciples of D.L. Moody, okay? And he lived in Chicago during the time where something crazy happened in Chicago. Have you guys heard about the Great Fires of Chicago during the 1870s? Oh, man. Most of Horatio's businesses burned down. And this guy was a successful, influential man. And it burned down. And this was at the cusp of this man using his business success and influence to kind of spearhead the movement and revival in places like London, where there was so much social cultural decay. And he was actually planning, despite the tragedy that happened to his wealth, he continued to plan to help D.L. Moody with this revival. Okay? But for whatever reason, he sent his family first. He had to stay behind because he had to take care of some business issues, back in Chicago. His 3 daughters and his wife was on a ship to London when it had this tragic accident where all 3 of his daughters just perished in the Atlantic. His wife survived. This man had, riches to rags, lost his daughters. And he was on another ship, to recover the remains of his, daughters, and, it was this rescue expedition, knowing full well that, but this is where he penned this. When sorrows like sea billows roll, no matter what, God is my fortress, it is well with my soul. This is what he wrote. It's unthinkable, it's shocking, it's so convicting. And what we fail to realize is what happens to Job happens all the time, actually. We live in a broken and fallen world, don't we? And what's incredible about Job is it's a story. It is, God's representative account of his servant, reminding us that the blessings is not what measures our faith. Our faith is not contingent upon the blessings ultimately. These blessings come because God deems that we are ready and fit to actually have these resources. And, the opening, the prologue, sets the scenes incredibly. When I was young, the time that I dreaded the most was when my dad would tell my mom and my sisters and me, it's like, tonight is family worship time. I dreaded that time the most because my dad would have family, now with my son, if I did 15 minutes devotion with my son Caleb, that's like I went overboard with him, With my parents, they would have like worship service for like 2 hours, and that would be the norm, and it was torture, And if you look at Job's story, that was the measure of Job's character. The first paragraph from verse 1 through 3 is basically Job was blameless. And because his relationship with God was right, God actually said, you are ready to take care of all these blessings. You are ready to not get seduced by worldly riches, but actually be a good steward of it. This is a measure of your faith, not the other way around. So I'm going to bless you with all these things because I know that you're not going to get seduced by them. But what's so funny is 1 generation later, look what happens in the next paragraph from verse 4 to 5. What happens to his kids, his sons and daughters? They're like party animals, aren't they? They lived it up. I don't blame them, The Bible doesn't say anything about were they using these celebrations as like, Bible study meetings. It doesn't say that, but it just says they loved enjoying the blessings that God, gave to this family. I don't see anything wrong with that, But for Job, it weighed upon his heart because he didn't want his kids to get seduced. Yeah. Because their faith was still, young, compared to Job. Yeah. Yeah. So what did he do? He reeled them back. You partied for 3 days. We need to have worship service. That's what Job was doing with his kids. He was trying to show them, you're enjoying the blessings of God. We need to honor God. We need to recognize God. Because no matter what, your relationship with God is foremost. It's the most important thing. And that's what Job did. It says, for Job, he would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt, offering for each of them. Yeah. It's reminiscent of what Abraham did with Isaac around the same time. Yeah. Because first and foremost, God requesting Abraham to do the unthinkable. For Abraham, it was a matter of worship and recognizing that God is sovereign, even over the unthinkable. So Job, perhaps in his heart, my children have sinned and have cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular practice. See, verse 1 through 3 is basically a description of his character, but verse 4 through 5 is basically his character in real life. He was a man who led his family to God every single day. Always. It was a regular practice. It strikes a heart on dads, especially as Father's Day is nearing, doesn't it? Yeah. Do we lead our children to offer up burnt sacrifices? Saying, I set this aside so that I could consecrate myself unto the Lord, devote my life to the Lord. That is why Job was actually given this prestigious, we think, poor Job. But the thing is, Job's, faith was tested because God sovereignly knew that Job could not ultimately be shaken. God knew that. His 3 friends did not, actually. If you look at, please read further into Job, but Eliphaz, Bildad, his, Zophar, his other 3 friends, at first they're great friends. They're good friends. Probably better friends than most friends that we know because, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they come to Job and spend 7 days and 7 nights with him on the ground as he is weeping. They actually go down with him to the ground, silently, just being with Job for 7 days. Has anyone here been 7 days and 7 nights with their loved one when they suffered tragedy? It's hard for me with my dad to be with my father-in-law in the ER for like 4 or 5 hours, and I get like, oh, I need some air. I need to go out, Yeah. Me being a, fickle human being. Yeah. It's hard, but the 3 friends were good friends. They stayed with Job for 7 days and 7 nights in the ground, mourning with him, weeping with him, The thing is, they were good friends, but slowly and but surely, what happened is they started to rationalize. Job, they started to think philosophically, They started to kind of become a little bit proud. And they start telling Job, after those 7 days of being a good, sometimes being silent is better than trying to rationalize, Just be with them in silence, But they started to kind of talk to Job. It's like, Job, are you sure you didn't sin against God? Are you sure, like, deep down inside you have this you sinned against God? Are you sure? They started to doubt him. Yeah. And Job, he got so exasperated. He says, I do not question God. I fear him wholeheartedly. I know he has his will. Yeah. I'm a wretched man. My circumstances show it. But I know that God has a plan. He has a will. Yeah. I will worship him. I was shocked when pastors or chaplains, when they go to like hospices, this is kind of like what my dad used to do, and my grandfather used to do, is he would go to hospices and he would come before them, and me, I would just want to listen to them and talk to them and have them they always said, we are not here to do anything else but to help these people worship God in their time of need. Yeah. At that time, I was like, oh, Dad, what are you doing? But now I realize what they were thinking. Yeah. What do you do in times of unspeakable tragedy? What can you do? Yeah. Exactly what Job did. Yeah. Because when God sees it fit for our faith to be tested, he's going to test us. Yeah. He's going to test us, not to torture us. Not to be spiteful or cynical, like most people are when we test our kids. It's like, did you really study? I'm going to test you. Don't we do that to our kids? I did that to Caleb all the time too. Really? Did you study for your AP World History test? Really? I'm going to test you. We do that because of our own cynicism, because of our own insecurity and uncertainty as a parent. God does not do that because God sees Job for who he is. He sees him perfectly. So I'm going to bless you with this test of faith. Why? Because you're going to come out of the flames of discipline even stronger, even more influential, even more rich. Because ultimately, at the very end, what happens? God blesses him with way more than he had before. Why? Because his riches is a reflection of his rich faith in God, not the other way around. So Job gets tested. And Satan, he thinks like, I got you, God, on this one. Yeah, you'll see, God. And God already knows. He doesn't, he's so like at ease. It's like, I know my servant Job. You don't know him. I know him. He will never turn from me. Yeah. I know him. He is a man after my own heart. Yeah. And so when all these things happen, all these tragedies, unspeakable suffering happens, Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. Yeah, he's a human being. I mean, who wouldn't? Then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. When people shave their head in the Jewish culture, it's basically, I have come undone. I am bare before my God. Yeah. You see me for who I am. Yeah. I come before you. That's what he was doing. And what does he say? I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken away. Praise the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin by blaming God. What an amazing testimony that Job, it's God's faithfulness. God is faithful in testing us. No one will think of it that way, do we? It's like, God, why are you testing me? Why are you having me endure this unspeakable pain? Yeah, and emotional upheaval. Why, God? No one welcomes it. Yeah. No one wants it. God is saying, because I'm ready to bless you. I don't think I've ever seen a true servant of God. I'm not talking about leaders who once were and they crash and burned like crazy, I'm talking about those who withstood the test of time. If you listen to every one of their stories, you think because they have this amazing calmness and serenity and joy and the smile and this ambiance and presence, and you would think like this person hasn't suffered a minute in their lives. You would think so. You ask them, they would give you a whole list of the time that God tested them. And they would never question it. They would say, God gives, he takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised. He deemed it fit to test me because he knows me. He knows what I could withstand and what I can't. And what he sends my way, he does so to strengthen me, fortify me. I mean, it's so crazy that Satan says, you've placed a hedge around this Job all his life. You've given him this false sense of security. Look at the way Satan, wow, man, Satan is intense. He's so sophisticated in the way that he talks to God. God is not shaken by that. I know my servant Job. I know him. And look what happens. Job is unshaken. He gets his heart is throbbing and is aching, and his grief becomes even worse because of his friends who starts in a well-meaning way. It's almost a cultural thing. It's like in Korea, my aunt used to complain. It's like in the United States, their funeral services is so just quick and simple. In Korea, when we had to, do our funeral rites for our parents in Korea, it wasn't like one and done thing. It should last for 4, 5, 6 days. And I would kind of tell her, it's a cultural difference. It's when I listen, it's like, yeah, you have a point. You have a point. We hate mourning with the people who mourn. Because sometimes that scandalizes our mind as if God is not good because tragedy befalls even the most faithful people. No, exactly why. Because God wants to bless us even more with a stronger and more unshakable faith. So even people like Horatio Spafford, the guy who says, "It is well with my soul," even, more so than before all this tragedy happened, his testimony, it's like worldwide, all throughout history, even now. His hymn rings in the hearts of people who suffer, who look to the light of God's faithfulness. Even now, as they sing this hymn, God is faithful. And that is what matters. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. What's so interesting is, Jesus alluded to this during his ministry because, this was a huge question for the Jews during that time. I mean, for all time. The disciples were thinking like most Christians today think, like, look at all this unspeakable, unaccounted for, undeserved, so to speak, tragedy that befalls. Like, look at this, Jesus, the disciples would come to people who were born blind, born mute, born, deaf. Yeah. It's like the disciples would, put Jesus on the spot. They weren't afraid. And they would say, Jesus, like, what was God thinking when when these people who were born blind, born deaf, with these, disabilities, what about these people? Isn't it unfair? Isn't it unjust? How can a good God, a God of justice and fairness and holiness, allow this to happen? And what does Jesus say? Was it really God's will? He kind of, talks to the disciples. You can reference this in John chapter 9, verse 2. He says, the disciples ask him, saying, "Teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?" Oh, man. The disciples had a very, very good but distorted sense of what true righteousness was. He says, this, what did he do that to deserve this? Oh, maybe his parents were sinful people, that it befalled upon their children. And how does Jesus reply? He says, "It was neither this man nor his parent, but it was in order that the works of God might be displayed in him." Because we're so confined in our understanding and thinking to what we see right here and now. We're so limited, but God sees. And God uses purposefully to his purposes and for his glory to show. It was for this very reason now what I'm about to do. Because what does Jesus do right after that? He heals this person. And what is representative of that healing is not just the physical healing, but to show that he has power over everything, not just over physical ailments, but the deep ailment of the human soul. Don't you know that? I'm doing this to show you, to reveal to you that I have come to heal the greatest of all illnesses, the inability of the human soul and heart to see God. And that is the glorious thing that God was doing in Job's life. His influence, his power, his testimony is so much greater, isn't it? Even now. I get convicted and blessed by Job, inspired by Job, because of how God used him and God tested him. Can you imagine if he just, if all his riches and all his power and influence was just about him? It would amount to nothing. But God used him mightily. All of us, we have our stories of tragedy in our lives. All of us, we have it. We can literally just be probably grounded to the ground, or we could be just tread upon and stomped upon and just become so low in our hearts and in our minds and in our souls. But these are the times when God reminds us. This is the time of the testing of your faith. This is the time of the testing, where greater blessing I have prepared for your life. I'm going to end with just the words of this amazing hymn that Horatio Spafford penned during his time of just unspeakable pain and suffering. This is what he wrote. "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to know, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul." Let's go ahead and pray. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for your amazing grace, Lord.